The drums began before sunrise, the deep talking drums calling the village awake like ancestors clearing their throats. Women tied their finest wrappers, men rubbed she-butter into their arms, and the elders gathered beneath the Iroko tree where truth is said to fear no one. This was meant to be my day of honor, the day my name would be tied to another and spoken with respect. In our land, a wedding is not just between two hearts, but between families, ancestors, and the unborn. Yet as the drums spoke of joy, my spirit trembled. For the earth sometimes celebrates before it swallows you, the elders say, when the drumbeat changes suddenly. Listen with your bones. I stood in the bride's hut as my aunties painted my hands with camwood and traced symbols of prosperity along my wrists. They sang softly, reminding me that a woman's patience is her crown, and that marriage is a river one must cross with closed eyes. I believed them, because love had trained me to believe. For 4 seasons, Kofi had spoken gently to me, promising shelter, loyalty, and a future planted deep in the soil. He had wiped my tears when my mother joined the ancestors and sworn before the moon that I would never stand alone again. On that morning, wrapped in white cloth and hope, I trusted him more than I trusted the ground beneath my feet. The wedding compound overflowed with people, some invited, others drawn by curiosity and gossip. Palm wine flowed, goats bleated in protest, and laughter rose like smoke into the sky. Kofi stood at the center, dressed in embroidered robes, his smile wide and practiced, like a mask carved by a skilled hand. His family sat proudly, especially his mother, Adwoa, whose eyes measured everything and forgave nothing. I noticed how her gaze slid over me like cold rain, but I told myself, not every silence hides a knife. The elders raised their staffs, signaling for the ceremony to begin, and the drums softened to a heartbeat. When I stepped forward, the singing stopped, as tradition demanded, and all eyes followed my feet. The earth was cool, the air heavy, and my heart pounded so loudly I feared it would interrupt the vows. Kofi took my hands, but his palms were dry and distant, not the hands I knew in the dark. The chief elder asked the question that binds spirits, asking Kofi if he accepted me before the living and the dead. That was when he laughed, a short, sharp sound that cut through the compound like broken calabat. Laughter at a wedding is a bad omen, but no one stopped him. He leaned closer, so close I could smell palm wine on his breath, and spoke loudly enough for all to hear. "Did you truly believe," he said, "that a man like me would marry a woman like you?" The words struck me harder than a slap, and the crowd gasped as one body. Before I could speak, before the elders could raise their staffs, a woman stepped forward from among the bridesmaids. She wore white cloth like mine, her beads identical, her smile sharp with victory, and I recognized her immediately. It was Amma, the woman who shared my sleeping mat, who held me during my nights of fear, who called me sister. Amma wrapped her arms around Kofi's neck and kissed him without shame, without haste, as if sealing a long-promised claim. The drums fell silent, completely silent, and in that silence, my heart shattered. The elders rose in confusion. The crowd murmured, and my knees weakened, yet I could not fall. Amma turned to me with eyes sweet as poisoned honey and announced that this wedding was never meant for me. She said, "I was a rehearsal, a stepping stone, a foolish woman who mistook kindness for love. In our culture, betrayal is heavy, but betrayal done in daylight is a curse." Kofi's mother stood and walked toward me slowly, like a queen approaching a prisoner. She reached out and tore the bridal cloth from my head, the cloth my mother had worn before she died. Ripping it so fiercely, the beads scattered into the dust. She leaned close and whispered words meant to wound forever, saying poor women dream because truth would kill them. The crowd watched, frozen, because shame shared publicly becomes a lesson no one forgets. I felt my ancestors turn their faces away in grief. The elders say, when disgrace is served publicly, it is meant to kill the soul. Amma clapped her hands, and young boys dragged forward a wooden board painted with symbols and markings. What should have been a praise display became a record of mockery, showing moments of Kofi and Amma together, moments I was never meant to see. Laughter rippled cruelly through parts of the crowd, because not every witness has a clean heart. My ears rang, my chest burned, and my breath came in broken pieces. Then Kofi's father pushed forward, pressing folded parchments into my hands, demanding my mark. He claimed my ideas, my counsel, my labor, saying everything I had given now belonged to their family. My fingers shook as I pressed my thumb into the ink, because grief can make even the strong obedient. As my mark stained the paper, something inside me went quiet and cold. The drums did not resume, the elders did not speak, and the wind itself seemed to retreat. Kofi smiled in triumph. Amma stood tall in stolen white, and his family toasted their victory. They believed the story was finished, that I would leave broken and forgotten. But the elders say, the chicken does not crow when the leopard is already at the gate. Without warning, the great wooden gates of the compound burst open with a sound like thunder splitting stone. Dust rose, children screamed, and warriors stepped aside instinctively. A tall man entered, wrapped in dark cloth, his presence heavy with authority and controlled fury. I knew that walk before my mind could catch up, knew that face shaped by years of power and restraint. It was my father, long absent by my own request, flanked by men whose silence promised consequences. And as his eyes found me standing torn and trembling in the center of the compound, the earth itself seemed to hold its breath. The elders say when a powerful man enters without greeting the drums, he has come to end a story, not begin one. My father did not bow, did not clap, did not speak at first, and that silence crushed the compound heavier than shouting ever could. His men formed a wide circle without touching anyone, yet suddenly no one felt free to move. Kofi's smile faded slowly, like paint washed by rain, while his mother's proud spine stiffened with unease. The villagers sensed it at once. The air had changed, and change never comes gently. Even the ancestors seemed to lean closer. My father stopped a few steps from me and looked me over carefully, not as a chief inspecting cattle, but as a parent counting wounds. His eyes rested on my torn cloth, the ink-stained thumb, the tears carved into my face without mercy. When he spoke, his voice was calm, low, and terrifying in its restraint. "My daughter," he said, as if no one else existed. "Who has done this to you?" The simplicity of the question broke what little strength I had left, and I bowed my head because words could no longer carry my pain. In our land, when a father asks such a question publicly, the guilty begin to sweat. Kofi's father stepped forward quickly, forcing a laugh that fooled no one. He greeted my father with false respect, calling him stranger, elder, passerby. He claimed that family matters were being handled and that no outside interference was needed. My father listened patiently, nodding once, twice, like a man counting steps to the gallows. Then he turned his gaze to the elders seated beneath the Iroko tree, the guardians of truth. "Were you present," asked Tem, "when this woman was humiliated before ancestors and people?" The elders shifted uncomfortably, because truth spoken late is still truth, but it burns hotter. One elder finally stood, leaning on his staff, and confirmed everything. He spoke of the laughter, the tearing of cloth, the theft of honor and labor. As he spoke, murmurs spread through the crowd like fire in dry grass. My father's jaw tightened, just slightly, and those who knew power recognized the sign. He turned slowly to Kofi, whose eyes now darted like a trapped antelope's. "You," my father said, pointing calmly, "stood before elders and mocked what is sacred." Kofi opened his mouth, but no sound came out. My father gestured, and one of his men stepped forward holding the parchments I had marked. He examined them with care, tracing the ink with a knowing finger. "These marks," the man said quietly, "were made under distress." Kofi's father protested loudly, insisting that the agreement was binding and witnessed. My father raised one hand, and the noise died instantly, as if cut by a blade. In any land that respects ancestors, my father sighed a vow, made through cruelty carries no power. The elders nodded, because they knew this law older than memory. Then my father did something no one expected. He turned to the crowd and spoke so all could hear. He revealed his name, his lineage, and the lands under his authority, stretching farther than the river's bend and deeper than the forest paths. Whispers exploded as recognition dawned, because his name was spoken in markets with reverence and fear. Kofi's mother staggered backward, gripping her wrapper, as understanding struck her like sickness. The man they had insulted, the daughter they had crushed, belonged to a house that could unmake theirs without lifting a spear. The ancestors do not rush justice, but they never forget. Emma laughed nervously and stepped forward, trying to reclaim attention. She mocked me again, claiming I was still nothing without my father's shadow. She boasted that she had won, that love was for the clever, not the naive. My father turned his eyes to her slowly, and for the first time, fear erased her smile. In our stories, he said, the hyena always laughs before the trap closes. He asked her one question only. Did you conspire in this humiliation? Amma hesitated for half a breath, and that hesitation condemned her. The elders rose together now, staffs striking the ground in unison. The chief elder declared the ceremony suspended, the union void, the shame unresolved. He announced that the matter would move from celebration to judgment, from laughter to reckoning. The crowd erupted, some assenting, others backing away, because justice in daylight terrifies those who profit from darkness. Kofi fell to his knees, clutching the earth, pleading ignorance, pleading loud, pleading anything that might slow what was coming. But the ancestors do not bargain with liars. My father stepped closer to me and placed his hand on my shoulder, steady and warm. You asked me once, he sighed softly, to let you live without your name protecting you. I nodded faintly, remembering my stubborn wish to be loved as an ordinary woman. I honored that wish, he continued, but protection does not mean abandonment. His words wrapped around my heart like healing cloth. He straightened and faced the compound again, his voice now iron beneath calm. This humiliation, he declared, was planned, executed, and celebrated, and every act has a return. He ordered his men to seal the compound gates, not with chains, but with presence. No one could leave until the elders finished speaking, because fleeing before judgment is an admission of guilt. Kofi's father wept openly now, clutching his chest as realization crushed him. Kofi stared at me with terror, finally seeing me not as a tool, but as consequence. Amma stood frozen, her stolen white cloth suddenly heavy as a burial shroud. The drums remained silent, waiting, because drums never interrupt justice. The chief elder lifted his staff and announced that the council would sit immediately. He declared that lies told before ancestors demand public correction or public punishment. The villagers pressed closer, drawn by fear and awe, knowing this story would be told for generations. I stood between my father and the elders, no longer trembling, because humiliation had burned away my fear. Whatever came next would not erase my pain, but it would give it meaning. And in our land, meaning is the first step toward healing. When the elders strike the ground 3 times, it means the ancestors have been summoned, and no lie survives that sound. The chief elder did not shout, did not threaten, yet the entire compound sank into a silence thick as harmattan dust. Even the children stopped whispering, sensing that something older than anger had arrived. My father stood still, hands behind his back, letting the law of the land take its course. In our culture, power that rushes justice weakens it, but power that waits makes it unbearable. That waiting began to crush Kofi and his family like a slow stone. The elders questioned Kofi first, because in matters of broken vows, the one who called the gathering must speak. He tried to stand tall, but his knees betrayed him, shaking like leaves in a storm. He claimed confusion, love, and pressure from his family, weaving excuses as a spider spins weak silk. Each sentence contradicted the last, and the elders listened without interruption, because silence invites truth to hang itself. When he finished, the chief elder asked only one thing. Did you plan this humiliation before the sun rose today? Kofi opened his mouth, then closed it again, and that was answer enough. Amma was called forward next, her chin lifted high in defiance, though fear trembled beneath her pride. She accused me of deceit, poverty, and manipulation, claiming she only revealed the truth. But when pressed about the timing, the torn cloth, the laughter, and the public stamping of ink, her voice cracked. One elder reminded her of an old proverb: the goat that cries innocence while chewing yam has forgotten its mouth is visible. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Amma's confidence collapsed like a poorly built hut in heavy rain. Her silence became heavier than any confession. Then the elders turned to Kofi's parents, because greed rarely walks alone. His father fell prostrate, begging forgiveness, claiming ignorance of the plan's cruelty. His mother wept loudly, calling on ancestors to witness her pain, but the elders reminded them that silence in the face of wrongdoing is a form of consent. One elder spoke sharply, saying, "A house that plans shame for another invites shame to sleep in its own bed." The crowd nodded, because this truth had been taught since the first villages rose from the soil. Guilt settled over them like nightfall. The chief elder then addressed my father directly, acknowledging his restraint and patience. He asked whether my father sought blood, wealth, or reconciliation. My father's answer surprised everyone. He said he sought balance, not destruction, because destruction feeds bitter. He reminded them that justice without wisdom turns the wronged into future tyrants. Still, balance does not mean softness, and the elders understood this well. They retreated briefly to consult, forming a tight circle beneath the Iroko tree. The waiting stretched painfully, each heartbeat louder than the last. As the elders deliberated, whispers raced through the crowd like restless spirits. People spoke of my father's lands, his authority, and the mistake made by mocking his daughter. Some pitied Kofi, others cursed him openly. I stood quietly, feeling both exposed and invisible, reliving the laughter, the tearing, the shame. My father leaned slightly toward me and spoke softly. "Remember," he said, "today will not define you. It will define them." His words steadied me, anchoring my heart as the wind of judgment gathered strength. The elders returned at last, their faces carved with gravity. The chief elder raised his staff and began to speak slowly, deliberately, so no word could escape accountability. He declared that the marriage rites were null, the agreement void, and the public humiliation recognized as a grave offense. Kofi's family was ordered to return every gift I had brought, doubled, as cleansing for the insult. Amma was forbidden from claiming the marriage because a union born of cruelty poisons future generations. The crowd gasped, because such rulings carry long shadows. But the elders were not finished. They declared that Kofi must undergo public atonement, kneeling before the village at dawn to confess his wrongdoing. He would be barred from marriage discussions for a full cycle of seasons, his reputation stripped until restored by proven humility. His parents were ordered to provide restitution to my family, not as payment, but as acknowledgement of wrong. As for Ama, she was commanded to stand before the women of the village and explain her actions, because betrayal among women cuts deepest. Her face drained of color as the weight of this punishment settled. Kofi collapsed fully now, sobbing into the dirt, clutching the earth as though it could swallow him. His mother wailed, rocking back and forth, while his father stared blankly ahead, broken. Amma screamed that this was unfair, that love should not be punished, but the elders silenced her sharply. "Love that feeds on another's pain is not love," the chief elder said. The crowd erupted in murmurs, because the truth landed cleanly and without mercy. The ancestors, satisfied, seemed to withdraw slightly, leaving human consequences behind. My father was invited to speak one final time. He stepped forward, his voice calm but carrying across the compound. He warned the village against mistaking quiet humility for weakness. He reminded them that dignity does not announce itself with noise. Then he turned to Kofi and said, "You laughed when you thought there would be no cost." His eyes hardened. "Now you will learn that every laugh, borrowed from cruelty, must be repaid with shame." The words struck deeper than any blow. As the elders dismissed the gathering, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the compound. The drums did not resume celebration. Instead, a slow, solemn rhythm began, marking the end of joy and the beginning of consequence. I looked around at faces filled with awe, fear, and reflection. Some avoided my eyes, ashamed of their laughter earlier. Others nodded respectfully, finally seeing me as more than a quiet woman. I realized then that humiliation had transformed into visibility, and visibility into power. Yet as we prepared to leave, My father paused and whispered something that chilled me. "This is not the end," he said. "Humiliated pride seeks revenge, and revenge never travels alone." I followed his gaze to Ima, whose eyes burned with silent fury, and to Kofi, whose shame had curdled into something darker. The elders had spoken, but hearts do not always obey counsels. Justice had been served publicly, but privately, storms were still gathering. And in our land, the most dangerous stories begin after judgment, not before. They say when justice ends, the drums may fall silent, but wounded pride continues to beat in the chest. The village returned to its routines the next morning, yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. Women fetched water more slowly. Men spoke in low voices, and children were warned not to repeat what they had heard. Shame had settled like morning mist, clinging to every compound it touched. Kofi's household became a place people avoided, not out of hatred, but out of fear of shared disgrace. In our land, disgrace spreads faster than fire if not contained. Kofi did not appear at dawn for his public atonement, and that absence spoke louder than confession. The elders waited, staffs planted firmly in the earth, their patience thinning with every passing moment. Whispers began to rise, and some villagers shook their heads knowingly. "A man who refuses humility chooses a harder lesson," one elder muttered. My father stood among the onlookers, his expression unreadable, but his eyes alert. He understood what many did not yet see. Defiance had replaced regret. Uma, on the other hand, appeared early, wrapped in dark cloth, her face tight with forced composure. She stood before the women as commanded, but her words carried no remorse. She spoke of betrayal, of dreams stolen, of humiliation inflicted on her instead. Some women listened quietly, but others frowned, recognizing the absence of accountability. One older woman interrupted her sharply, reminding her that a tongue that sharpens itself on cruelty eventually cuts its owner. Ama's eyes flashed with resentment, and in that moment it became clear that punishment had not cleansed her heart. It had hardened it. By midday, news spread that Kofi had fled the village before sunrise. His family claimed ignorance, but no one believed them. The elders were furious, not because he ran, but because he disrespected ancestral judgment. A council was called immediately, and my father was invited to attend again. The chief elder declared Kofi's flight an open challenge to communal law. "When a man runs from justice," he said, "justice grows legs." The villagers murmured uneasily, because they knew what that meant. My father spoke carefully, warning against rash retaliation. He reminded them that chasing a cornered man without strategy leads to bloodshed. Still, the elders agreed that Kofi could not be allowed to vanish without consequence. His lands were seized temporarily, his family placed under watch, and messengers sent to nearby villages. Ama's involvement was also reconsidered because her words that morning betrayed hidden intent. The elders began to understand that humiliation had not ended the story. It had merely exposed its deeper layers. That evening, as my father and I prepared to leave the village, a young boy arrived, breathless with news. He claimed to have seen Ama speaking secretly with Kofi's cousin near the forest path. They spoke in hushed tones, glancing over their shoulders, carrying small bundles. My father's face darkened slightly, not with anger, but with recognition. "Secrets grow teeth when fed in darkness," he said quietly. He instructed his men to remain alert, knowing that desperation often leads to reckless plans. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Night fell heavy and moonless, the kind of night elders warn children about. Fires burned low, and dogs barked without clear reason. Somewhere beyond the village, voices murmured and stopped abruptly when branches snapped. I could not sleep, my mind replaying laughter, judgment, and my father's warning. In the silence, I realized something painful and sobering. Humiliation does not always end with submission. Sometimes it transforms into vengeance. And vengeance, once they awaken it, does not ask who deserves it. Just before dawn, chaos erupted. A cry pierced the night, sharp and urgent, followed by shouting. Flames leaped suddenly from Kofi's abandoned compound, lighting the sky with angry orange. Villagers rushed out, carrying water and shouting warnings. The elders arrived quickly, faces tight with alarm, recognizing the act for what it was. This was not an accident. It was a message. Someone wanted fear to replace shame. As the fire was subdued, evidence emerged quickly. Tracks lead toward the forest, hurried and careless. A torn piece of AMA's cloth lay snagged on a thorn bush, unmistakable in pattern. Gasps rippled through the crowd as realization dawned. The elders exchanged grave looks, because arson against a seized compound was an act of open rebellion. It signaled a willingness to harm the village itself. My father closed his eyes briefly, as though confirming a truth he had already accepted. The chief elder spoke sternly, declaring that the matter had escalated beyond personal insult. What began as humiliation had become a threat to communal peace. He announced that the ancestors would demand heavier balance now. Messengers were sent immediately to neighboring councils, spreading word of the offenders. Ama's family was summoned, their faces pale with fear and disbelief. The weight of collective consequence pressed down hard, and no one felt untouched by it. I stood beside my father, watching the smoke drift into the early light. Part of me felt vindicated, another part afraid of what lay ahead. My father placed a firm hand on my shoulder and spoke quietly. "This is why elders warn against cruelty," he said. "It creates storms that consume even the innocent." He looked toward the forest path, eyes sharp and resolute. But storms can be weathered, and justice, when patient, always returns stronger. As the sun rose fully, illuminating the scorched earth, I understood that the story had shifted again. This was no longer only about my humiliation or Kofi's betrayal. It had become a lesson unfolding before an entire people. The ancestors were no longer whispering. They were watching, and somewhere beyond the trees, two wounded hearts were running from shame, unaware that every step they took was leading them deeper into judgment. The most dangerous part of the tale had just begun. They say, when a wrongdoer runs into the forest, the trees themselves begin to whisper their name. At dawn, the elders assembled again, not beneath the Iroko tree this time, but at the edge of the village, facing the forest, where shadows still clung to the leaves. The fire's smoke had barely cleared, yet its message burned fresh in every mind. This was no longer a matter of insult or broken vows. It was now a wound to communal peace. In our land, when peace is threatened, neutrality becomes guilt. The ancestors do not tolerate hesitation when harmony is at stake. The chief elder spoke first, his voice steady but heavy with resolve. He declared that Kofi and Ama had crossed from shame into rebellion, and rebellion demands pursuit. Selected men were appointed as trekkers, chosen not for strength alone, but for discipline and restraint. They carried no weapons meant for killing, only staffs and cords, symbols of capture and return. My father was asked to advise, not command, because justice must remain communal. He agreed, warning that fear-driven chases often turn wrongdoers into martyrs. The elders nodded, understanding the danger of bloodshed. As the trackers prepared, news spread through neighboring villages like wildfire. Councils were alerted, paths watched, markets warned. In West African tradition, a person fleeing justice finds doors closing one by one, even among strangers. Hospitality bends, but it does not break ancestral law. Women whispered prayers as the men departed, asking the spirits of the land to guide truth to light. I watched from a distance, my chest tight, with a strange mix of dread and responsibility. This pursuit had begun because of me, yet it had grown far beyond me. Deep within the forest, Kofi and Ama moved with frantic urgency. Their initial confidence had dissolved into paranoia as every snapped twig sounded like pursuit. Ama cursed the village, the elders, and me, blaming everyone except herself. Kofi, silent and brooding, struggled with regret, twisted into resentment. He convinced himself that humiliation had robbed him of dignity, and that running was the only way to reclaim control. But the forest does not honor stolen dignity, it only reflects what one carries inside. They reached a small clearing near an abandoned hunting shrine, a place once respected but long neglected. Ama suggested hiding there, believing forgotten places offered safety. Kofi hesitated, recalling stories of spirits guarding such sites, But desperation overruled caution. They rested briefly, sharing bitter words and colder silences. Hunger gnawed at them, and fear sharpened every sound. Neither noticed the subtle signs around them, the sudden stillness of birds, the way the wind shifted uneasily. Meanwhile, the trackers advanced steadily, reading broken branches and disturbed soil like open pages. One of them paused often, listening not with ears alone, but with instinct. "The forest is uneasy," he murmured, "and unease leaves trails." As they neared the old shrine, an elder among them warned that disrespecting sacred places invites misfortune. They slowed their pace, announcing their presence aloud, not to frighten, but to show reverence. In our culture, even in pursuit, respect for the unseen remains law. Back in the village, tension tightened like a drawn bowstring. People gathered in small clusters, speculating and worrying. Some feared retaliation, others divine punishment for collective involvement. My father addressed the elders again, urging them to prepare for multiple outcomes. He reminded them that captured pride resists quietly only in stories. In life, it often lashes out. The elders ordered night watches strengthened, and rituals prepared, not for vengeance, but for restoration. Restoration, they believed, was still possible. At this, Emma suddenly screamed as something brushed her ankle. She leaped up, heart racing, convinced it was a spirit's warning. Kofi dismissed it angrily, accusing her of weakness, but his voice shook. As dusk approached, the forest seemed to close in, shadows lengthening unnaturally. Hunger turned to panic, and panic to accusation. Amma blamed Kofi for dragging her into disgrace. Kofi blamed Amma for inciting cruelty. Their partnership, built on betrayal, collapsed under pressure. Just as darkness settled, the trackers emerged at the clearing's edge. They did not rush or shout, only stood quietly, staffs grounded, forming a wide circle. Kofi tried to run, but slipped, falling hard against the earth. Amma screamed again, this time in fury, hurling insults and threats. The elder among the trackers raised his hand, calling for calm. He spoke gently, reminding them that return offered mercy, while resistance invited heavier consequence. His words carried the weight of ancestral patience. Amma refused to listen, accusing the village of conspiracy and injustice. She grabbed a burning branch from the shrine's remains, waving it wildly. In doing so, she crossed a final boundary, threatening sacred ground. The trackers froze, recognizing the danger of escalation. Kofi watched in horror as her desperation turned reckless. Before anyone could intervene, the branch slipped from her grip, igniting dry leaves nearby. Flames flared briefly, then died. But the damage was done. The elder stepped forward slowly, his voice firm now. He declared that Emma's actions had confirmed her rebellion against both people and spirits. She collapsed, sobbing, her defiance finally broken by fear. Kofi, defeated and trembling, lowered his head, unable to deny his role any longer. The trackers bound their hands gently, but securely, not as captives, but as returnees. In our tradition, being brought back alive is already a mercy. As they were led away, the forest seemed to release a breath, birds calling again softly. The path back to the village felt longer, heavier, each step echoing with consequence. Word reached the village before they did, stirring a mix of relief and apprehension. I stood beside my father as the figures emerged from the trees, smaller now, stripped of arrogance. My heart pounded, not with triumph, but with solemn anticipation. Justice was returning, but its final shape was yet unknown. The elders prepared the square once more, lighting ceremonial fires and summoning witnesses. The village understood that this next council would not simply punish, it would decide whether reconciliation remained possible or whether exile awaited. In West Africantales, exile is a fate worse than shame, severing one from ancestry and identity. As Kofi and Ama were brought forward, the crowd fell silent. The story that began with laughter and humiliation had become a lesson written in fire, forest, and fear. And still, the ancestors had not spoken their final word. When captives are brought back at sunset, the elders say the ancestors wish to witness the truth before night hides it. The village square filled slowly, not with excitement, but with heavy expectation. Fires were lit in a wide circle, their glow revealing faces marked by worry, anger, and reflection. Kofi and Ama were led to the center, dust-covered and silent, no longer defiant, no longer proud. The cords binding their wrists were loosened, but not removed, a reminder that mercy still waited on behavior. My father stood near the elders, calm as still water, while I watched from the edge of the circle. The chief elder rose and struck his staff once against the earth, calling the council to order. He spoke of the path the matter had taken, from mockery to humiliation, from judgment to rebellion. His words were careful, because recounting wrongdoing publicly fixes it in memory. He reminded everyone that justice is not a spectacle but a lesson meant to restore balance. The elders nodded in agreement, and the crowd remained silent, absorbing each word. In West African tradition, silence during judgment is a form of respect. Even the wind seemed to pause. Kofi was ordered to speak first, and this time he did not hesitate. His voice was low, stripped of arrogance, trembling with exhaustion. He admitted to planning the humiliation, confessing his fear of appearing lesser than Ama's family. He spoke of greed, pride, and cowardice, naming each like a wound. As he spoke, some villagers looked away, ashamed of having laughed that day. Others listened intently, because confession is the first door back to humanity. When he finished, the elder asked whether he accepted the elder's authority fully. Kofi bowed deeply, pressing his forehead to the earth in submission. Ama was then called forward, and the atmosphere shifted sharply. Unlike Kofi, her confession came slowly, painfully, each word dragged out as if pulled from stone. She admitted to jealousy and manipulation, confessing that humiliation had felt like victory at first. But she also spoke of fear, of losing status, of feeling invisible beside others. Wealth. Some women murmured softly, recognizing emotions they, too, had known. Still, the elders did not soften, because understanding does not erase responsibility. Ama wept openly, her strength finally spent. The chief elder addressed them both, reminding them that harm done publicly requires public repair. He explained that restoration is harder than punishment, because it demands humility over time. The elders retreated again briefly, consulting not only each other, but the customs passed down through generations. My father remained silent, his restraint earning quiet respect. When the elders returned, their decision was clear and heavy. The crowd leaned forward, knowing this ruling would shape more than 2 lives. The elder declared that Kofi would undergo a year of service to the village, working fields not his own, repairing compounds, and assisting the elders. This service would be unpaid, visible, and humbling, designed to rebuild trust slowly. Ama, however, faced a different fate, because her actions had twice endangered communal peace. She was sentenced to temporary exile, not as revenge, but as reflection. For 1 full season cycle, she would live with distant relatives, removed from the village's influence. Exile, the elder reminded, is meant to teach absence the value of belonging. The ruling stirred mixed reactions. Some felt it too lenient, others too harsh. But elders' decisions are not debated publicly, because unity matters more than individual opinion. Ama collapsed to her knees, crying out in despair, pleading for forgiveness. The elder allowed her tears but did not change his ruling. Tears wash the face, he said, but they do not rebuild what fire has burned. Kofi remained bowed, accepting his fate silently. His submission marked a turning point, fragile but real. Then the elders turned to me, and the square grew even quieter. The chief elder acknowledged my endurance, my silence, and my dignity under humiliation. He reminded the village that strength often speaks softly and arrives unnoticed. I was asked whether I accepted the elder's ruling, because reconciliation requires consent from the wronged. My heart pounded as every eye fixed on me. I thought of the laughter, the tearing, the stamp pressed into my thumb. Then I thought of my father's words about meaning and balance. I stepped forward and spoke clearly, my voice steadier than I expected. I said I accepted the ruling, not because the pain was gone, but because carrying it forever would bind me to the harm. I asked only that my dignity be publicly restored, so no shadow of shame followed me. The elders agreed immediately, praising my wisdom. My father's eyes softened, pride shining through restraint. The crowd murmured approval, recognizing grace when it appears. In our culture, forgiveness offered freely carries great power. The chief elder ordered a cleansing ritual to restore balance. Water mixed with herbs was brought, and symbolic gestures performed to sever the tie between humiliation and my name. Kofi was required to kneel during this ritual, witnessing the restoration he had nearly destroyed. Ama, still sobbing, was led away gently by elder women, her exile beginning before dawn. The fires burned low as the ceremony concluded, marking both an ending and a beginning. The ancestors, appeased for now, withdrew into silence. As the council dissolved, villagers approached quietly, offering apologies, small gifts, and words of respect. Some admitted their laughter had come from ignorance. Not cruelty, but ignorance still wounds. I accepted their words calmly, understanding that healing spreads unevenly. My father placed his hand on my shoulder again, grounding me. You have turned pain into teaching. A sighed softly. That is how stories become wisdom. Yet as night deepened, I sensed that not all consequences were finished. Exile breeds reflection, but also resentment, and Kofi's service would test his humility daily. The village would watch closely, measuring change not by words, but by actions. I returned to my resting place, feeling lighter, yet alert. Justice had spoken, but transformation takes time. And in West Africantales, the final lesson often arrives quietly, long after the crowd has dispersed. The elders say time is the sharpest knife, because it cuts away pretense without spilling blood. As the seasons began to turn, the village watched closely, measuring change not in days, but in behavior. Kofi rose before dawn each morning, long before the drums called the village awake. He worked the fields of widows, repaired broken fences, and carried water for elders without complaint. At first, his movements were stiff, his humility forced, like a borrowed garment that did not yet fit. But labor has a way of reshaping pride, and slowly something in him began to bend. Children noticed first, because children see truth without agenda. They saw how Kofi no longer met eyes boldly, how he listened more than he spoke. They saw his hands grow rougher, his back more bent, his voice quieter. Some mocked him at first, repeating old jokes, but he accepted their laughter without anger. The elders observed silently, because real change does not announce itself. Each day he completed his tasks without excuse, without seeking praise. In our land, consistency is louder than apology. Meanwhile, Ama's absence left a hollow space that felt heavier than her presence ever had. She had been sent to live among distant kin, far from familiar faces and influence. News of her traveled slowly, carried by traders and passing relatives. Some said she wept daily. Others claimed she grew bitter and withdrawn. Exile strips a person of mirrors, forcing them to see themselves without reflection from others. For Ama, that solitude became both punishment and teacher. Whether she would learn depended on what she chose to listen to in the silence. The village itself changed in subtle ways. Laughter became more careful, gossip less reckless. Women spoke more openly among themselves about jealousy and rivalry, naming feelings that often fester unspoken. Elders used the story of my humiliation as a teaching, reminding youths that clever cruelty always overplays its hand. My name, once whispered with pity, was now spoken with respect. Yet respect carried its own weight, because visibility invites expectation. I felt watched, not suspiciously, but thoughtfully. My father prepared to return to his lands, his work in the village nearly done. Before leaving, he met privately with the elders, praising their restraint and wisdom. He reminded them that justice must heal the community, not only punish offenders. They thanked him, acknowledging that his patience had prevented bloodshed. When he came to me, his voice softened. "Your story will travel farther than you know," he said. "Make sure it carries wisdom, not bitterness." I promised him I would try, though I knew wisdom is earned slowly. As months passed, Kofi's service continued without faltering. One day, an elder entrusted him with overseeing a communal repair, a small test of responsibility. Kofi accepted with humility, completing the task carefully and without complaint. When praised, he redirected credit to others. This did not erase his wrongdoing, but it marked growth. Some villagers began to soften, offering greetings again. Others remained distant, unwilling to forget. In our culture, forgiveness moves at the pace of trust. Then, one evening, news arrived that Ama would soon return to complete her exile. The announcement stirred unease, like a drumbeat heard from far away. Memories resurfaced, wounds reopened slightly. The elders met to prepare, emphasizing that her return would be guided, not celebrated. Exile ends, but accountability remains. I felt a tightening in my chest, unsure what emotions awaited her presence. Part of me hoped for change, another part braced for disappointment. Ama returned quietly at dawn, thinner eyes shadowed, her once confident posture subdued. She did not enter the village square immediately, but waited at the edge, head lowered. Elders approached her first, questioning her conduct during exile. Her answers were subdued, lacking the sharpness that once defined her. She admitted to loneliness, to regret that grew heavier with time. She did not excuse her actions, and that alone marked difference. Still, words are seeds. Only time shows what they grow into. The elders allowed her to return under strict observation, assigning her to work alongside women she had once mocked. This was intentional, because humility grows fastest where pride once ruled. Ama accepted the terms silently, her eyes never lifting. Some women welcomed her cautiously, others coldly. Trust, once broken, rebuilds slowly, like clay drying under careful hands. Ama bore the distance without protest, learning that remorse does not guarantee comfort. One afternoon, as I fetched water near the stream, Ama approached me hesitant. The moment stretched painfully, heavy with unspoken history. She bowed her head deeply, a gesture rare for someone once so proud. She apologized, not dramatically, not defensively, but plainly. She admitted envy had poisoned her judgment, and that humiliation had taught her nothing until exile stripped her of applause. Her voice shook, but she did not cry. I listened without interrupting, my heart racing with old memories. When she finished, silence settled between us. I did not forgive her immediately, because forgiveness offered too quickly often rings hollow. I told her healing takes time and consistency, not words alone. She nodded, accepting the boundary without argument. That acceptance surprised me more than the apology. We parted quietly, neither relieved nor angry, but aware that something fragile had shifted. As the dry season deepened, the village gathered for a major festival honoring ancestors and renewal. Preparations filled the air with drums, color, and cautious joy. The elders debated whether Kofi and Ama should participate publicly. After long discussion, they agreed to allow limited involvement, believing reintegration must begin somewhere. Kofi was tasked with logistical work, unseen but essential. Ama assisted elder women, her role modest and supervised. The festival arrived, vibrant and solemn, reminding everyone that life continues despite pain. As drums echoed and dancers moved, the story that once divided the village now hovered as a shared memory. People watched Kofi work quietly, noted Ama's restraint, and observed my calm presence among the women. No one spoke openly of the past, but everyone felt its influence. In West Africantales, growth often happens without ceremony, woven into ordinary days. That night, as the fires burned low, the chief elder addressed the gathering. He spoke of the story the village had lived, not as gossip but as instruction. He reminded them that cruelty, entertained briefly, but teaches nothing lasting. He praised patience, accountability, and the courage to change. The crowd listened intently, knowing these words would outlive the festival. Stories, after all, are how communities remember who they are. As the people dispersed, I sensed the story nearing its final turning. Justice had been delivered, humility tested, and change begun. But endings in our culture are not sudden. They arrive like dawn, gradually revealing what was shaped in darkness. The ancestors had watched closely, and now they waited. One last lesson remained, quiet but decisive, and it would determine whether this tale ended as a warning or a blessing. The elders say a story is not finished until everyone learns what it was trying to teach. After the festival, the village felt lighter, as if a long-held breath had finally been released. Laughter returned, not careless like before, but thoughtful, measured. People greeted one another with more patience, more listening. The humiliation that once stained the air had been transformed into shared memory, and shared memory has power. In our land, pain becomes dangerous only when it is hidden. Once spoken, it can be shaped into wisdom. Kofi's year of service came to its end quietly, without announcement. On the final morning, he completed his last task before sunrise, repairing the chief elder's fence. When he finished, he did not wait for acknowledgement. He washed his hands, bowed to the elder's compound, and stood aside. The elders called him forward later that day, not to price, but to evaluate. They asked him what he had learned, not what he had lost. Kofi answered simply, saying he learned that dignity is not given by status, but earned through character. That answer settled deeply among the elders. Amma's transformation was slower, more fragile, but visible. She no longer sought attention or validation, choosing silence over defense. She worked steadily among the women, accepting correction without resentment. Some still distrusted her, others softened gradually. One elder woman remarked quietly that cracked pots can still carry water if handled with care. Amma never tried to force forgiveness, understanding that time was her only ally. In our culture, forced reconciliation is another form of violence. True repair must grow naturally. The elders convened one final council, not to judge, but to conclude. The village gathered, sensing the importance of the moment. The chief elder spoke of the journey the community had taken together. He named the wrong, the response, and the growth that followed. He reminded everyone that public cruelty poisons everyone who witnesses it, not just the victim. Then he turned to me, inviting me to speak one last time. I stepped forward, my heart steady, no longer weighed down by shame. I spoke of the pain I endured, but also of what it revealed. I told them humiliation did not come from poverty or silence, but from choosing cruelty when kindness was possible. I thanked the elders for restraint, my father for patience, and the women for support. I made it clear that I did not survive because I was strong alone, but because community corrected itself. The crowd listened closely, because truth spoken calmly carries authority. My father stood beside me, pride quiet in his eyes. He addressed the village briefly, reminding them that power reveals itself best when it protects the vulnerable. He announced that he would support the village's youth and elders with resources, not as charity, but as partnership. His gesture was not loud, but it was lasting. The elders accepted with gratitude, knowing such alliances strengthen communal resilience. Wealth, when guided by wisdom, becomes blessing rather than threat. The chief elder then made the final declaration. He restored Kofi's standing gradually, allowing him to re-enter communal life with humility. He warned him that trust rebuilds slower than walls, but effort is never wasted. He allowed AMA to remain in the village under continued guidance, emphasizing accountability over banishment. Finally, he declared my name publicly cleansed, honored, and protected. The drums sounded then, not for celebration, but for closure. Closure in our land is sacred. As people dispersed, many approached me quietly. Some apologized again, others shared how the story had made them reflect on their own actions. I realized then that my humiliation had become a mirror for the village. That realization did not erase the pain, but it gave it purpose. Purpose transforms wounds into lessons, and lessons, when shared, prevent repetition. This is how communities grow without tearing themselves apart. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I sat with the elder women listening to old stories. They reminded me that folktales are not entertainment alone. They are warnings wrapped in rhythm, truth stressed in metaphor. One woman said, "If this story is told well, another girl may be spared such pain." That thought settled deeply in me. Stories carry responsibility, not just drama. They shape behavior long after voices fall silent. When night came, the village rested peacefully. No fires burned in anger. No whispers stirred fear. The ancestors, satisfied, withdrew fully, leaving humans to live with what they had learned. I lay awake briefly, reflecting on how easily cruelty disguises itself as humor. I promised myself never to laugh at another's humiliation again. In that promise, I felt true healing begin. Healing is not forgetting. It is choosing better. And so, this story ends not with punishment, but with understanding. Not with revenge, but with restoration. In West African wisdom, the strongest community is not the one without conflict, but the one that survives it honestly. May this tale remind you that pride blinds, cruelty entertains briefly, and justice always returns, even if it walks slowly. The ancestors are patient, but they never sleep. If this story taught you something, share it. If it moved you, speak about it. If it reminded you to treat others with dignity, then its purpose is fulfilled. Like, subscribe, and share this story so the lesson travels farther than the pain. Because stories change people, and people change the world.